Are you the youngest lead producer on Broadway? Do you know?
I don't know. And we try to figure this stuff out, but, it's hard to figure out producers' ages. You don't want to ask. I do know that our team overall has to be like the youngest or one of the youngest.
Has that been a challenge? Have you felt that at all?
I think the fact that our show has...
I want to be a producer with a hit show on Broadway.
You're listening to the Producer's Perspective Podcast with your host, Tony Award winner, Ken Davenport.
Hey everybody, it's Ken Davenport. We are going to get to Jennifer Tepper, the lead producer of Be More Chill, the most talked about show on Broadway these days. It's breaking house records over at the Lyceum Theater. But before we do, I wanted to tell you about something I miss desperately. I used to run these rehearsal studios in Midtown, rent them out to Broadway shows and off-Broadway shows, and they were right here in Midtown, right here. Now they're gone. Disappeared. The building has been locked up. And what people don't know is there are actually very few rehearsal studios in Midtown until now. There's a brand new rehearsal studio right here, 321 West 44th Street. Welcome Sunlight Studios, the newest rehearsal studios on the block, available for rehearsal for your Broadway show, your off-Broadway show, your reading, whatever you'd like. To book a studio at these new spaces, visit sunlightstudios.com, sunlightstudios.com, right in the heart of the theater district. And so few rehearsal studios are. It is so dang convenient. We have already started to book stuff there ourselves. They've also got smaller studios if you just want a voice lesson or a class. Use code Davenport and receive a 5% discount on bookings until April 11th only. Use code Davenport and get 5% off at Sunlight Studios, the brand new rehearsal spaces. So visit sunlightstudios.com and book your space today. Now on with the podcast. Hello everybody, it's Ken Davenport. Welcome back to the Producer's Perspective podcast. I'm very excited for today. As I told her when I asked her to be on the podcast, it gave me such joy to send this invite to her because she once worked for me. I think you once interned for me as well.
I came up the ranks in your office.
Came up the ranks, and now she's a lead producer of one of the most talked about shows on Broadway. And also, I believe, could be one of the youngest, if not the youngest lead producers on Broadway. Please welcome the producer of Be More Chill, Ms. Jennifer Tepper. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm filled with joy too.
So the show just opened a couple days ago. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. We're really, really proud of it.
You should be. I mean, the journey for this and the journey for you with the piece and with Joe, I mean, this has gone on for a very, very long time.
Yes.
When did you first meet Joe Iconis?
I was obsessed with his work when I was an NYU student. In 2008, I found a dusty demo with his songs in a closet at the York Theater where I was interning. And I said, I have to do anything to work with this guy, to meet him, to start collaborating with him. I worked with a producer on Title of Show where I was the assistant director who was producing a 5-performance run of one of Joe's concerts and said, let me get coffee, let me do anything. So that's why I first started working with him on Things to Ruin, which had a 5-performance run at Second Stage. And I never looked back. And we've been working together on every project, every show for the last decade, whether it's been me, producing it or just special thanks or getting coffee, everything in between.
So I often ask people what draws them to shows. So when you were intern at York, what was it about the material that you were like, oh my gosh, this artist is special?
One of the first songs of his that I heard was this song called Helen, where the chorus is Helen's in Skinflix now, and it's about discovering that this girl you went to high school with is in Skinflix. And I thought, this guy is writing musical theater that nobody else is writing, that is both contemporary, but also has this vibe of old school musical theater and perfect rhyme and craft to it. And it just hit all of my sensibilities about how it just felt like he was writing stuff no one else was writing. And from the first time I heard his musicals as well, I was like, oh, these stories are about community, and just the way that he was writing really grabbed me, as well as, assembling a community of artists who created the shows together.
Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of things. I mean, already you've talked about working at a theater and assistant directing. Did you always want to be a producer?
What's funny is, so I went to NYU and I majored in dramatic writing because I loved writing and I loved theater. And I really thought I want to make musicals happen, but I don't know if that means commercial producing. But as soon as I graduated, I thought I want to work in a producer's office. And the first time I ever got to do that was working for you. It took me 2 years after graduation to get what I wanted, which was working for a producer, to kind of figure out to make musicals happen, like, do I want to try to work at a not-for-profit? Do I want to try to, be a commercial producer? I thought, there might be different paths to this. Like, the people I worshipped growing up included like Ira Weitzman and Ted Chapin and people who were not necessarily commercial producers, but who had roles in it. So I kind of trusted my path would lead to the right place.
And now what do you think?
I love being a commercial producer. I love the fact that we've gotten to do this. It's funny though. I think that, people are like, why didn't you produce one of Joe's shows earlier? And
I think that was me.
Yeah, you asked me that for years.
I think you asked me to produce one of his shows, and I was like, Jen, I'm not the person to do this. You're the person to do this.
You know what's so funny though? Because I'm such a theater historian and I look at this from that perspective as well. It's like when Be More Chill closed at Two River and we were all devastated and we were like, more people deserve to see this musical. At that point, I could have been like, hey, maybe I'll try to rent this theater. I'll try to do this thing. And I don't think it would have been the right choice for the show. And I've definitely, over the years, Joe's had this thing in development or that thing. And if that gets a good review or if that gets a moment to come to this theater, like I'm in, like I'll raise the money, I'll do it. And it felt like we were gathering skills and like every job I've ever had, like working for you, and working for other producers has prepared me, as well as working with Joe and working on all those projects has prepared me. And now it all comes together and we had this moment where it was the right moment for it to happen.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit before you went to NYU. And so where did you have to be? I mean, I love me some musical theater, but I don't know anyone that's as passionate about musical theater and Broadway like you are. Where did it begin?
I was so obsessed with it growing up in Boca Raton, Florida. And part of it that I think put on my theater historian brain early was that I didn't have the access to New York. Like I didn't live in New Jersey or Long Island or get to see Broadway shows. So I had to study them from afar. And that made me excited to like teach myself. So I would, pour over like liner notes and read Playbill magazine, even though I couldn't actually go to the shows and study them. And that I think put it in my head early that I was interested in that kind of research. But also, I came to New York 3 times before I ever moved here for NYU. So from the first time I came here, I was like, oh my God, I'm at the Eugene O'Neill Theater. Like, this is where Smokey Joe's Cafe played. Like, all the Smokey Joe's Cafe was at the Virginia. I effed that up. I'm thinking of Five Guys Named Mo. I would have made him delete that later. But no, I knew from the first time I set foot in each Broadway theater, like what else had played in that house. So I was so obsessed with it on such a level early that has kind of carried through with my whole career.
What was the first show you saw here?
Full Monty, yeah.
Full Monty.
Yeah, which is, so I'm producing Joe's next show starring Annie Golden, and she was in the first Broadway musical I ever saw, which I think about all the time.
So right out of school, the first gig you had was at the York?
That was my first internship. The 3 internships I had in college that were really like influential were that I interned for R&H, and I interned for the gang of Title of Show and ended up working on the show when it went to Broadway.
And how, I think a lot of young people look to try to get in the door. And one of the things I remember about you is and still to this day, your ability to just get in any door. I mean, we'll talk about Untold Stories in a bit, but you interviewed everybody and their brother and sister for that. And some of the biggest powerhouses on Broadway. And I just remember this about you as well. What do you think got you so many connections so early? Getting a Title of Show gig, getting an internship, getting all these jobs.
It's so funny. Like, you can see it either way because I really did. And I tell everyone who ever interns for me this, like, I spent the 2 years after I graduated applying for so many things that I didn't get. And I applied for a job in your office and I was dying to work there. And, who knows? Like, there's 100 people who apply for everything. But the way that I got a job with you was that when I was working on Joe's show, Blood Song of Love at Ars Nova, do you remember this? You saw that I was doing all this creative audience outreach and marketing. And that's how we first connected. And I invited you and you were like, oh, let's talk about you doing that on my shows. So it was really me doing my own thing that ended up getting me hired places. And it was similar with Title of Show. I invited the Title of Show gang to see a big thing I put together at NYU and was like, we're all obsessed with you. Would you come chat with us afterwards? We're a bunch of students, but I was doing something. I had something to invite them to. And I also think, the way I got my job as creative director at Feinstein's 54 Below was similar to how I got my job with you. Those producers saw that I was producing something of Joe's at the venue. And when they needed a new programming director, they were like, let's get that woman. So we saw her do that already. So it's just making your stuff.
That's why you left me to go work there. And what was the first thing you actually produced? You talk about this. So talk about that, because I know a lot of producers out there, young producers or emerging producers, want to do stuff, and they're like, oh, I can't do a $15 million musical. And many of them, frankly, stop right there and say, well, I guess I'll never be a producer. F this because I don't have $15 million. Mm-hmm. You didn't do that. What did you do instead?
What's funny is, so my job on a day-to-day basis on Be More Chill is so many of the things that I've been doing for 12 years, even when we're doing a show for 30 people in a basement. Like, producing involves so many of the same skills no matter what level you're doing at. It's only at different levels that involves the high level of money raising. So many of the jobs, the tasks are the same. Honestly, we've been amassing this army of people that are interested in Joe's work for so long. So when I thought, okay, I'm going to raise half of this money for this off-Broadway production, it was off-Broadway, so part of it is like the lower thresholds are slightly less intimidating. And in fact, a lot of the co-producers and people I brought on board are first-time and young producers who thought, okay, off-Broadway has, that entry level that's lower, as well as first-time investors. And part of it was I had all these people to call who I knew, this person loves coming to Joe's concerts and sometimes invests in Broadway shows. This person's always wanted to invest in Joe when the time is right. So many of my investors and producers were people I had cultivated relationships with for years, and that made it slightly less intimidating in that way. But I also think, to just start somewhere. Like, you don't have to produce a $15 million Broadway show. Like, you can produce an off-Broadway show, and, you just start somewhere. Raising the money at the Broadway level, though, it felt like I took a few steps at a time, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't jump in the deep end, from the beginning.
What was it like to make the decision to even jump on and produce the off-Broadway show? Did you battle with that? Was it an easy decision?
It was super easy. I mean, what happened really was the show, obviously, this has been well documented, but when it closed and, we were all disappointed nothing was happening with it, after the cast album started taking off like crazy, I would, I've been an advocate for Joe, whether I'm officially involved in a show or not. So for those 3 years in between, I was going, hey, let's do this concert at 54 Below and invite producers. And, we got the show licensed because we did it in concert at 54 Below. And hey, maybe we'll talk to these people about, a regional production. And it was just pushing those things. And then finally, after nobody being interested for years, there were like a bunch of producers who were all interested once they really understood the streaming numbers, which is we're up to 300 million streams now. No one knew exactly what that would mean. And then the Joes, Joe Iconis and Joe Trace, picked the producer they felt like they wanted to do it and said, you should do this with Jen Tepper. We had already met, Jerry Gehring and I. So we met at Sardi's about a year ago. It's only been like a year, and thought, okay, let's do this together, which was a great decision.
And obviously the show did unbelievably well off Broadway. Tell me about the decision to move it to Broadway. Did you open off Broadway going like, ooh, if this goes really well, we'll move it to Broadway?
Yeah, what was interesting was in talking to every, investor and also the actors and making sure everyone had the right expectations, we always said, we are so excited to finally bring this to New York. This might be the best summer ever, and this is absolutely it. And we'll get this fan base in who loves it, and, that'll be fine. Or maybe we'll transfer to off-Broadway. Who knows? Maybe we'll transfer to Broadway. Maybe this will be a tour. We kept every option open. But from the moment we sold out our off-Broadway run before opening night, and then put on an extension, which sold out in a few hours. I think from the moment, we started rehearsals for off-Broadway, I was like, we're going to Broadway. We're doing this. We're going to Broadway. I definitely remember opening night off-Broadway. I was going, we're going to Broadway. We're going to Broadway.
And what I love about this story is that, if you talk to any theater owner right now or last year, whenever, they will tell you, there are no theaters available. You got nothing. There's none out there. Forget it. Literally, no way. And then all of a sudden, one opens for you. And you, of all people, know how challenging it is to get these theaters. What was that like when you got that call?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I'm wearing a necklace that has a key on it because when we met with each of the Broadway theater owners, I was wearing it for good luck. Give us a key to your theater. And it was really cool. I've interviewed all of them for my book. So to walk in as a producer was really cool, and to talk about the theaters. They all say that. And it's fascinating. And we all love thinking about which show's going to go where. The moment that we got the call that we got the Lyceum was so special. I mean, title of show was at the Lyceum. So my first job I ever had was there. And that's what inspired me to write my books, was spending time at the Lyceum. And we never thought, every day I would talk to, one of our actors or writers and be like, maybe the Court, maybe the Longacre. And we didn't think it was the Lyceum because we assumed something else was in there after a play that goes wrong. And it was us, it turns out. Crazy.
How helpful do you think it was to have interviewed the theater owners before walking in there and asking them for a theater?
It's interesting. You know, I have all these relationships with people in our industry from different things. It's, you know, I don't think I ever would have been able to interview Patti LuPone for Untold Stories if I didn't book her at 54 Below. So there's all of this synergy in all of my like professional relationships. All the theater owners, I think, you know, seeing someone who has come up through the ranks like that, I think everyone was really wonderful about it.
Yeah, listen, I can speak for that experience. There is something about it when they've seen you in a box office or backstage at a theater. They just know you're serious about this industry and you're going to stick to it for a while. So let me ask you this. Did you... I don't have the data. Maybe you do. Are you the youngest lead producer on Broadway? Do you know?
I don't know. And we try to figure this stuff out, but, you know, it's hard to figure out producers' ages. You don't want to ask. I do know that our team overall has to be like the youngest or one of the youngest.
Has that been a challenge? Have you felt that at all? Both from outside sources and also yourself, just walking into the room knowing like, ooh, I'm talking to someone who's 80 years old and I'm going to negotiate a really good deal here.
There's something that's almost powerful about it, given what our show is. I think the fact that our show has been so powered by young people and social media, and a lot of the older people I'm in rooms with look to me to know what that means and to be able to speak to how we continue that and, you know, market our show and like talk to the fans about our show. So it's been an asset in that way. It's also, I think part of it is that people know I have such respect for history, for the decades past. So no one thinks that I'm like a young upstart who doesn't know about like the established Broadway rule. It hasn't been a huge challenge yet. We'll see.
What about being a female?
You know, that's been an interesting component of it because I actually think there's so many like lead female producers with visibility on Broadway right now, and it's going in such a positive direction that I just feel like part of that, it's also kind of been an asset in that way.
No challenges along the way. You've never felt, oof, this is a little bit harder than it should be.
There's definitely, you know, what's weird is that I don't feel it in moments where I'm in the room with important people. I actually only feel it in moments where it's like a lower level conversation or someone who, you know, I would never walk into the theater owner's office and feel different because I was younger, a woman. And there was a conversation that a bunch of the Tony nominated best actresses had a couple seasons ago where they were like, now, you know, we all love each other. Everyone feels really supportive. When we were at those auditions in the early days, that's when like everyone was awful to each other because we were, you know, being competitive women with each other. We did have, you know, during auditions, I was like really actively involved in casting the show with our team. And our musical director is a woman and one of our two casting directors is a woman. And there were a few times where someone would come into the room and say hi to all the men in the room and not like say hello to us, which was that was very strange. And I was like, so certainly there's definitely moments where you're like, okay, you know, and there's also, I think part of it is, I'm like, you know, if I'm going to cry, I'm going to cry. That's I'm seen as like a female thing. Like I can get pretty like happy crying, sad crying. And, you know, I'm surrounded by enough people who don't care. I think our show is full of people who are like, you know, if you're sitting on the floor in your socks because we're doing a Broadway show together and you're 30 years old, like that's great. There's a little bit of like, we're at summer camp and that's okay, that I think makes it okay to be yourself in whatever way that means.
Talk a little bit about that and how you market both yourself and your shows through social media, because it seems there is a real sense of authenticity and not caring about being in socks or wherever. Is that a strategy? Why do you think it's successful?
That's also, and I think that goes into what you said too, that sometimes older people actually don't understand that of the authenticity of it. I think it's important to not just be like, here's a press release about, you know, what's going on with our show. I think it's important to be like, oh my God, I'm freaking out because Sondheim's here today. Or, you know, hey, I just fell in a mud puddle. You know, it's all part of it. And I find that, you know, the job of being a producer is being responsible with like running the show, with people's money, with the decisions being made. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're walking around in a pinstripe suit shaking hands all the time. Like you're a human. And I think people like that. And I think part of the magic of our show is that we've been doing this in like barns and basements together for so long. And there's this like family and authenticity that, you know, one of the confusing things about Broadway is like, well, Roland is used to hanging up the lights and, you know, our band members are used to vacuuming and it's all a real thing. So I think retaining some of that while also understanding that we're expanding and certain jobs have to be delegated is part of the magic, and showing people that is part of it too.
There's so many different skills that it takes to be a producer on Broadway: marketing, raising money, relationships with artists, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think is your best skill?
I think the knowledge, has always been my super skill of being able to be like, hey, what if we tried this in the marketing campaign? Oh, I know that in 1972, a really similar thing happened. And this is a weird way it mirrors today, even though we have social media now. And being able to pull on that knowledge to go, oh, and also, when we did the show of Joe's, we tried this and, on a smaller level knowing. So having the institutional knowledge of both theater history and of everything Joe has ever done for the past 10 years and combining those has been kind of my super skill.
So speaking of history, what made you want to write the book, Untold Stories of Broadway?
It was truly hanging out at the Lyceum with the title of Showgang and running around as assistant director. I was so fascinated by the fact that we were in this building from 1903 where all of these shows had played before us. And Jeff Bowen, who's the composer lyricist of that, and we would look at a specific Lyceum show and, listen to the recording before the show. We would kind of bring it to life. And, that would make the experience there for us more special. And that made me go, oh my God, what if there was a book that was kind of like the At This Theater, which I always love, but was personal to people where you were going, okay, I'm in this Lyceum dressing room. Who was here before me? What happened 10 years ago? What happened 20 years ago? So that's really, what inspired it. And also just wanting to go, I want to interview actors and producers and directors, but also, stagehands and musicians and company managers. And it really, when I think about interviewing sound designers, and that truly has been informative as a producer in figuring out, talking to sound designers, just giving kids that are reading these books and young people who don't know perspective on all the jobs in theater was a big goal of mine.
Do you remember your favorite interview or your favorite quote from all those books?
Oh, it was Hal. It's but the fact that, as you said, so many people said yes who didn't know me from Adam, and that was really an honor. But the fact that I got to go into Hal Prince's office years ago and ask him just tons of questions, and he told me a story that I have not read in any other Hal Prince literature, which made me really happy, which was of him being an assistant stage manager and at the Broadhurst many, many years ago. And you'll have to read the books for that story. But there were so many people who just said, the magic is still there, and we all know how hard this business can be, but really sitting down with people and hearing about some of the hard parts and also really knowing that everyone's still doing it because they love it, because you would have to, was a big lesson.
How many volumes are there?
There are 3. Hopefully there'll be 6 because I have to get to all the theaters, but it's on pause at the moment.
Any other book ideas in your future?
Yeah, I love the idea of writing a book about, Be More Chill, about all what we're doing right now at some point. And I think hopefully that'll happen.
I keep saying Be More Chill is one of the most exciting case studies that Broadway has seen in decades. So hopefully you will write that book because I would like to read it.
Yeah.
So as the show just opened, obviously you've had this huge run-up of excitement. Now, are you going to the theater every night? I'm sure you are. But what else are you doing? This is the most exciting part of any Broadway show is the run-up. Now it's open. And often the industry moves on to whatever's next as you've got to stick it out. What are you doing now?
There are so many things that I have wanted to do, whether it's creative little marketing things or, hey, we've always wanted to do this once we were on Broadway to, that we are saving. So there really are a lot of things in the can that we're going to pull out later. But it is the Hal Prince lesson of wake up the next morning and do the next show, which is, I'm producing Joe's next show, Broadway Bounty Hunter, and we are opening off Broadway this summer at the Greenwich House downtown, Ars Nova took over Barrow Street. So really the next thing we're doing is, let's do all the shows now. Now we get to do all the shows. But as far as Be More Chill goes, yeah, I am there. And it's part of the magic also is this weird synergy. I almost feel like I'm in the band and I'm one of the understudies. It really does feel like every day, we're all talking to each other. And if I wasn't popping in the band room to check in with the band, they would be surprised. There's definitely going to be that for quite some time.
So obviously you have this teen market crazy with Be More Chill, breaking house records unbelievably well, doing unbelievably well. What's your strategy to make sure that those parents are having a great time and telling all their friends as well as the kids? It's
a great question. What's so funny is that, with all of the new musical theater writers for years, Joe was always the one that I think had, a slightly older fan base. We would do these concerts and it would be, 60-year-old women from Long Island who love his cabaret work. So the fact that the way we got to Broadway was powered by the fuel of young people is not necessarily the most expected, although he does write so well for young people. On a day day-to-day basis, we are doing, you know, tons of like advertising and marketing strategy to make sure that everyone knows it's for them. I was actually really glad that a number of the reviews were like, this is for people of all ages. But I think part of it is like a slight misconception that comes with how our show happened. I don't think it's any more just for kids than School of Rock or Anastasia or any of these family shows. And as I sit in the audience and watch all of these people laugh at, you know, jokes about Eminem and like references to music from the 80s, I'm like, this really is for people of all ages. And both word of mouth and traditional advertising, we're hoping will keep that engine going. It's also, you know, we're proud of the fact that the fan base was so young, but it's not, you know, like a ton of 13-year-olds. The super fans that got us here and streamed it really are a wider variety of ages than people think. And we're seeing that at the theater, and it's just growing older and older, which is good.
Will you produce anything that Joe has not?
I definitely will. And I don't think that that is going to happen like in the immediate future, but it definitely will happen. I think a lot about like the great writer-producer partnerships of like, there's something that's so special about doing this together in this moment. And I think at some point, you know, there'll definitely be other projects that I produce as well.
Your dream job in 20 years, what would you be doing?
You know, one of my dreams that I've always said is to run encores. That's something that like I always have wanted to do. And I've been lucky enough to be a little bit involved in Encores Off Center over the years. I, you know, worship what they do over there. And I love that it's now like there's so much new blood all the time. It's treasuring like old underappreciated musicals. So that's definitely one of my dreams.
I'm having lunch with Jack Vertel for like 30 minutes.
I don't want to steal his job. I love Jack Vertel.
Okay, I'm going to ask you my last question, which is my genie question. If the genie from Aladdin came to visit you and granted you one wish, you're such a positive person and so passionate about Broadway, and obviously you love it so much. I will actually never forget the moment, first time you were in my office, I think, you were writing for BroadwaySpace.com or interviewing to write for that social networking site. And you just had this huge smile on your face. And I just remember thinking, that is a person that wants to work on Broadway. You obviously love it so much. What's the one thing that you hate about it that you would ask this genie to wish away in an instant?
I do hate that we have, I hope I'm not taking this as a trick question, but I do hate that we have these 41 theaters. I think that there is more product that has room and could find an audience. And I think the fact that, 41 is a little bit of a stranglehold and there are other spaces. Like my dream of dreams is that there are 3 more theaters in the next 10 years. And the fact that we've gotten the Hudson back makes me feel hopeful about that. But I do think, now that we all see there are shows that have the money to come in and can't get a space, that scares me for like the future of musical theater, especially when, it's harder to break in and like get through that gate for the first time. My hope is that we would have some more theaters.
What do you think about Fiddler doing so well over at an off-Broadway theater right now?
God, I love that. I do think, having produced an off-Broadway commercial run, like that rolled into a Broadway run, which is a model that is not done all the time. Like there are other models that can work. And I think I'm so excited that that's happening with Fiddler.
Well, we're excited with what's happened to you and with Be More Chill. Thank you so much for being here. Best of luck. And thanks to all of you for listening. Go read Untold Stories of Broadway, volumes 1 through 3, and then email Jen and tell her to finish 4, 5, and 6. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time.
Look out, Broadway.